Hey everybody, Ben Nelson, the Everyday Real Estate Investor here. Hope you're having a fantastic week. You are going to have to bear with me again, as if you can't tell, my voice is coming back, but it is not quite there. I don't know what I've been getting over, but it's been I had my shoot for the American Dream last Monday, which was great, and just barely got that TV shoot in. And the next day started losing my voice. So I guess I should feel fortunate that I was able to get that in before I started losing my voice, because that would have been a bummer. I would have had to figure out something or just miss the shoot or something. So anyway, feeling fortunate in that sense, and hoping I get past this. But bear with me in the meantime, as my voice is just not quite there. So we are going to talk a little bit today. This is probably going to be another shorter version. I failed in getting a guest on here this time. I am sorry. I mentioned that I have some guests lined up, working on getting those. I'll probably end up having quite a number in a row versus these monologue ones that I've had. But I hope you find these ones still helpful and getting those nuggets that can help you be more effective in your real estate investing, in life in general. We kind of run the whole gamut, the whole range of topics here, from strategy to mindset, because they're all important to your overall success. So today I am going to talk about the levers of supply and demand. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of things that affect supply and demand, and we tend to just look at inventory levels and absorption, and how quickly things are being purchased, and those are important, and that's a piece of the puzzle. But there are other things that affect supply and demand that are always worth looking at and seeing where the trends are going, and things like that, so you can kind of see where the puck's going, right? And make sure you're skating to that, as Wayne Gretzky so famously said, right? You don't want to skate to the puck. You want to go where it's going, and be there, and you want to set yourself up for where the trends are headed. And so that's what we want to do. So I'm going to talk about that. This is, again, probably going to be a shorter episode, partially just due to my voice, but hopefully we can hit on some things here, and it'll be helpful to you. So I'm going to talk about 4 different things on a high level that have to do with supply and demand. So let's jump into it. First one is what I already said, which is inventory levels. So the amount of something on the market, we're talking about real estate here, but it's going to be anything. So how much is on the market, how much is available for sale, versus how many people are out there actually buying that. And so when you look at a market report, you can see number of months of inventory, and that's a function of how many active listings there currently are versus how many sold last month. And so that's how you come up with that. I actually think it's pending, not sold, but in any case, it has to do with how quickly those active listings would be sold or go pending if no new homes came on the market. Here in Portland, I don't remember, we're like 1.2 or something like that. It's very, very low. So basically, if no new homes came on the market in less than 2 months, they would all be gone. And so that's very low inventory, right? So that's just a function of number of a product on the market and how many buyers are out there currently looking for that product. That's how you come up with that, right? So inventory levels is a factor of supply and demand. And then you have to look at how quickly can more product come on the market. Our buyers are going to continue to buy at that pace. All of those things are going to factor into how that trend is going to go, because producing inventory for housing it's not like you can just ramp up the production line. I mean, you can to some degree, but it takes a long time, at least around here, to get developments approved and to get permits and all that stuff. You start on a project and you're not selling that project for a couple of years down the road for anything that's of substance and going to actually affect inventory. You're 2-3 years down the road before you actually have houses that can be purchased. So production levels, net migration, all of that, because that's going to affect your buyer base, and is that going to continue? But that's that portion of it is just basically your inventory levels, how much is out there, and then what is being absorbed, how many are being purchased, is that likely to continue. Um, Now we're going to jump into a few here that kind of go and look behind the curtain, I guess, of just strictly the the product and how much is out there, um, in the sense of supply and demand, because there's some other factors that affect this, that there could be a huge amount of demand, um, and it wouldn't matter necessarily. And I think that'll make doesn't make sense when we get into it. So, and this one in particular, first, actually, I'm gonna skip this one first, and I'm gonna go next to and talk about growth, like restriction of growth, because this affects supply in a big way, and it also can affect demand, because especially if it's in a market that people want to be in. So, when I talk about growth restrictions, what I mean, they could be either physical or they could be legislated, man-made restrictions. They could be a number of different things. But you think, um, the San Francisco Bay Area, very dense. You've got physical barriers that are there to constrict growth, and there's quite a few markets like this. In Portland, we have rivers, we have hills and mountains, and we have constricting things that prevent you from building in certain areas. And so that is going to affect supply, and it's going to affect how much can come to the market within an area, or you're going to have to build more density, right? But even then, if you do that, you're still going to be restricted on how much growth you can have in supply, which is going to affect that supply demand ratio, and ultimately probably will have an upward increase in pricing, and we'll get there later on as well. But so on top of that, those are physical restrictions, right? Mountains, rivers, soils, um, all sorts of natural things that are going to prevent you from just sprawling, right? Um, and then on top of that, a lot of these places, and I kind of alluded to it earlier with how long it takes to get, from dirt to a finished house. There are uh, legislated restrictions, right? There are zoning laws, and there are urban growth boundaries, and there are just all sorts of things that are not physical barriers, but they are barriers to growth. And so they're going to constrict that supply in a different way. But you can't build this big development because it's not zoned for that. You can't build it because it's outside the urban growth boundary. You can't, you have to build higher or lower density. So you can't build the number of houses. You have to build half of what you normally could build there, right? All sorts of stuff like that that dictates what you can and can't put in a location. So that is going to restrict supply. And again, that's anything from how long it takes to get through all the red tape to just what actually you can build there. So hopefully that makes sense. That's these are growth restrictions and growth, which restricts how much inventory there can be, and it stifles that supply. So we already touched on this other legislation. Zoning I touched on. That's kind of in the growth restrictions, but there's other laws that can affect supply and demand indirectly. Here in Oregon, we have landlord tenant law on a statewide level that restricts rent growth. And they're talking about restricting it more just because the way they structured it had to do with it was tied to inflation. And so, well, we all know what inflation was like this last year. So it was outside of what their expectations were of how restrictive it was going to be. And so now they're looking at restricting it more. What that can do is that it whether you like it or not, it deters investment. And so you're probably going to stifle some supply in that way as well, because you're going to be disincentivizing people to invest in the area. Now, not everybody will stop investing in the area. And I'll touch on this in a little bit as well. I feel like there's still opportunities in markets that have those things, if you're thinking long term and big picture. But you do have a certain number of investors that are like, I'm not going to deal with that. I don't want to do that. I'm going to go to a market that's more friendly to, me as a landlord, and I'm not going to invest there anymore. So you do have people, anytime you're not as business friendly, businesses are going to choose to do business elsewhere, and landlords are or businesses or business owners. So that's also going to constrict supply in a different way, because you're taking potential development out, and so it's hard to measure because you don't know exactly how much that is, but it's there nonetheless. Um, Now, this last one is one that I think is super important and that people don't really consider. I mean, people talk about it, but I don't think they really understand um, exactly the nuances of it and how this kind of affects the market, and that's finance. And so I touched on this earlier, where I said, you could have all the demand in the world, meaning people want to buy it and there's low inventory, but ultimately it may or may not matter. And that's because it comes down to financing, because the availability of capital and the affordability of capital are key components to being able to buy real estate. And it's comes down to what's called the capacity to pay, right? You can want something all you want. You can, and I tell my kids this all the time, by the way. When they say they want something, well, you can want it, but it doesn't mean that you can get it, right? Necessarily. So you gotta work for it. You gotta save for it. You gotta figure out a plan to get it. You just asking me for it does not mean that you're going to get it, right? So you can have all of these home buyers that want to buy, but if financing is too expensive for them to afford it, which we're seeing some of that right now, where interest rates have been compared to what they were a year ago. And the other piece is it available? And we haven't seen this yet. This is what we saw back in the financial crisis, that really added fuel to the fire, and really, helped. Um, not helped, but really caused even more damage than what already was going on. And that's where the lending was just not available. And so even investors that wanted to get out there and buy stuff at a discount, they couldn't do it unless they had cash, right? Um, you couldn't refinance out of something. You couldn't go buy another. I mean, and there was some lending, but it was super restrictive, right? It's not like there was no lending, but it was super restrictive. And so it was really difficult to get a loan. And so that's what you saw, was a lack of a capacity to pay. Now, there was a lot more going on in the financial crisis than just that, but that certainly added to it and made it worse. The banks not having the ability to lend or not lending, that capacity to pay went away in the sense that there was no capital available, right? So the finance side's a really big piece to it. Again, you could have very, very low inventory. You could have now, of course, you probably have inventory levels climbing, which was what we saw back then, because people can't pay and people still have to sell, and so you'll typically see inventories rising in that situation. But what the point is that you could be in a scenario like right now where we have low inventory, but if financing went away, or if financing gets more restrictive or even less affordable, rates trend up even more, then that's going to have an effect on supply and demand. And again, that demand may be there, but it may not be able to be released, because they may want to buy, they may feel like they're in a position to buy, other than the capital's not there or is not affordable enough, and so they're waiting it out. So, and actually, on that note, that's something that I've talked about in the past, and I think a lot of people still feel. Now, the spring market here has been pretty darn good. It's been pretty active, but interest rates, there's people waiting for interest rates to they'll continue to trend back down. They're not going to get down to 3% again, so don't wait for that. But there are people buying now, and they're going to refinance when rates get back down a little bit more, which I think is a great strategy, because what's going to happen is inventory levels aren't going to change dramatically. People are staying in their homes because they have low interest rates. There's not a huge amount of foreclosure activity, so we're not going to see a lot there. But what's going to happen is rates are going to come back down, trend back down. Everybody that waited is going to jump on that bandwagon, and all of a sudden now we've got this competition again. So I think it's a great time to buy right now when there's a little bit less competition. There's all sorts of loan programs, buy downs, lots of things you can do to strategically do that in a way that actually still makes sense, and you can set yourself up to do something, a year or two when the rates are lower, and it doesn't actually hurt you to buy now, and you avoid that maybe next run up where people are fighting over homes again when rates come back down. So I don't even know how I got down that road, but essentially what the point is that finance is a key component to it. If people, that's where the underlying demand, it could be there, but just because the demand is there does not necessarily mean it's going to be unleashed, because there may be that finance component, the affordability, the capacity to pay, and not just the demand, right? So hopefully that all makes sense. Now, what do you do with all this? So pay attention to the trends, pay attention to inventory levels for sure, and how in absorption and how much is coming online, and in the future, like what's on the market now, what's in the pipeline, know what's coming online, know how many people are moving to the area, so you know what that absorption in the future is going to look like. But also pay attention to, what's your market? What are the growth restrictions? What are the restrictions with zoning or other legislation, things like that? And then what's financing doing? What's the trend? How affordable is the market you're investing in? Is there going to be an issue with capacity to pay that's going to potentially stifle the market, stifle the growth? Or is there still room, looking at incomes, looking at growth of jobs, all of those things? Can the market still continue to grow in appreciation and have the people that live there continue to afford the houses if there's appreciation, right? One thing that I'll add as I close here is that don't be afraid of markets that have growth restrictions, because historically, if you look at these markets, especially these markets where, and I'm not going to get into the political side of it today, I'd be happy to maybe do that some other time, but you look at some of these markets that have restrictions on legislation wise, right? You look at Bay Area, you look at New York, you look at some of these markets that they've implemented these laws on rent control and things like that, with the intent to try to keep prices down and keep things affordable. And I'm not saying this is the reason for it, but I will say that they're some of the more expensive markets in the entire country. And so, the one side may say, well, it's a good thing we did that because otherwise it would be even more unaffordable. I would maybe argue that it could have contributed to that. And I'll just kind of leave it at that at the moment, just for you to think on. But it's something to consider if you're looking at a market that maybe has some of those restrictions. It might be a reason to actually invest in that market versus shy away from it. It might be a reason to do it. Because if you're investing for appreciation, if you're investing for equity growth over time, there's a good chance that markets that are more constrictive, they're going to constrict supply. And if there's still demand there, if there's still people moving to that area and that want to live there, and that population is growing, but the inventory is not able to grow at the same rate that it needs to keep affordability, that supply and demand factor, and that is going to come into play, and prices are going to continue to go up. So again, can't say that that's a direct correlation and that's the only cause of that. Obviously, those are big cities. There's a lot going on there, but I would at least say it could be a contributing factor to that. So something to consider if you're looking to invest in a market. Again, Portland and Oregon as a state has some restrictions, and so people shy away from it sometimes. But I think the future is bright for Portland, despite what you may see highlighted on some of the news stations. And I think we're going to continue to see growth. And I think appreciation and equity growth is going to be great here in the market if you're investing in this market. So thanks for putting up with me hearing my voice and for tuning in. Hopefully I'll be more able to talk next time, and hopefully I'll have a guest with me as well. So look forward to chatting with you guys then. Thanks again for tuning in. Join me next time. And until then, go out and look for some amazing real estate to buy.